Welcome to the Libertarian Conservative Group podcast, the show that discusses everything from a libertarian conservative twist. I'm James, and today we're talking about the Foundation Party with Chris. On today's show, we have another instalment of Meet the Party. I'm joined today by Chris Mendez, leader of the Foundation Party. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, James. Thank you very much for inviting me here.
No, thank you very much for coming on. It's always a pleasure to talk to like-minded political parties and individuals like yourself.
Fantastic.
I'll say this, as I do on every episode, should you be listening for the first time. I intend for all the questions to remain the same for each party, with a few variations to, of course, suit their preferences. So I'll start with an easy one, if that's all right, Chris. What's the history of your party?
Well, we, between amongst the group that are the founding members of the Foundation Party, we have a mixture of Conservative, Labour, and UKIP and ex-independents, but we all met in UKIP and we all fought the referendum campaign.
Yeah.
So that's how we sort of came together, and we rather felt that UKIP was struggling to demonstrate any potential post-Brexit, and we felt that even despite the fact that we won the referendum and that we were leaving the European Union, but there was still an awful lot more to argue about, and that there was still a missing opposition party in the country. So we felt, very audaciously, we felt we'll set up a new party. And so that's really what we did. And this was a couple of years ago now. So this was around March 2018. We've evolved a lot since, continually clarifying our precise message in our campaign and policies and so on. We took a little bit of a back seat during the Theresa May's withdrawal agreement and the panic, obviously, from those that supported Brexit as to whether it was going to happen or not, and the emergence of the Brexit Party. And it seemed that it was the wrong time for us at that kind of time, as you can imagine. So we took a bit of a back seat to kind of hopefully see that situation resolved. But we're back stepping forward again, and we contested the local elections last year in May 2019, just last year, which was a very early experiment for us. Minimum resources. And we had a mixed night. We lost a councillor, got another re-elected, and got a new councillor elected. So it was a good night in the end. And so that was quite exciting, and this gave us some validation that we're on the right track, really, in terms of messaging and so on, and really reflecting the thoughts and feelings of people that don't feel represented by other parties. But since then, we've pushed on, and we're looking really now to begin now, really, in a big sense, albeit a certain virus has turned up, obviously, which is transforming politics, obviously, completely.
Yeah, of course.
But generally speaking, we are looking to really, really now push on and promote ourselves as much as possible, present ourselves for the consideration of people that are looking for a new alternative, fresh voice in British politics.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Like you said, Brexit, I think, was the pinnacle point where people realised that politics was broken. Unfortunately for UKIP, I used to be a member many, many, many years ago. Back when Brexit was still a thing, not even to be named then. It was about leaving the European Union. But it does appear that the party hadn't ever prepared for the eventual move away from campaigning to leave the European Union. And then, of course, with the disbursement of Nigel Farage, the party has about imploded inwards. Infighting is just... It's unfortunately pointless now as a political party. So I'm glad that, of course, you yourself, and you've brought in other people too, which is always great. You've brought in, like you said, Labour, UKIP, Independents. Did you say Conservatives? Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it's a bit of a mixed group, actually, and also independent as well. But absolutely. And unfortunately, that was the case. Really, there was plenty that felt, understandably, that Brexit was the final victory at the end and it was job done. But actually, speaking and thinking about politics more broadly, it's actually just the very beginning. It really, really is of a much longer campaign going forward. And so Yeah, I just didn't. Yeah, it just felt that there's much more to be done. So and UKIP, you're absolutely right. UKIP really did not plan for that kind of future, and unfortunately, it shows. And so it may take a long. We're doing it the hard way
Yeah.
in terms of creating something new, but I think it's absolutely what is necessary, and so that's what we're going to try and do.
No, that's absolutely it's admirable. I'll put it that way. It's admirable. There's not many people who have the confidence and the courage and even the conviction to go out and fight their own corner, even if you know that you're going to be up against an absolute tidal wave of
Mm.
opposition. So it's very admirable, and I always congratulate everyone who stands on their own 2 feet and walks forward with the principles in tow. Go on.
Oh no, I was just going to add. I mean, it's but at the same time, there are people out there that are ready to vote differently. I mean, we saw it last year in May in the local elections. Just to take an example, in Clacton, in Tendring Ward, we got a councillor elected where we amassed precisely the same number of votes as the Conservative Party, the incumbent Conservative councillor,
Yeah.
and Liberal Democrats combined, and they finished second and third, and we topped the poll and finished first. And so, when that sort of thing happens, it just kind of goes to show that people are keen. If they're not worried about a Jeremy Corbyn taking over the country and turning the clock back 50 years, they will absolutely are very open to voting for something new, for something fresh. We've seen it. And so we're looking to hopefully grow and expand and contest more elections in elsewhere in the country and see if we can really get this train moving, because it's badly needed.
Well, it's couldn't be put better, really. Enticing new voters, people will always consider what your fundamental values are. So, can you tell me what they are for you and your party as a whole?
Yeah, certainly. Yes. Well, I mean, if I just sort of comment more broadly on where we're coming from and in terms of
Yeah,
our attitude to society, we live under an ancient political establishment that thinks it always knows best. It cares very little about how the people think and feel. Our politicians see themselves as very important people with all the answers. But in a world of revolutionary digital technology, people are organizing their own lives more and more on their own terms. Just as we see with modern day banking and retail and television and film media, news often from social media rather than a state broadcaster, people want to make their own choices. And yet our institutional political culture is still what it was during the last century, where politicians insist that they know best with their top down, one size fits all central planning thinking.
yeah.
Watching them resist a recent referendum result they didn't like really shouldn't have been a surprise. So the Foundation Party, on the other hand, has a very different attitude. We want people to be treated like adults. Our campaign is about empowering individuals, families, and communities to have a greater say, whether that's more choice in public services, freer markets so the businesses can innovate and grow more freely and more quickly, devolvement of decision making from Westminster to local authorities, the abolition of ultra political correctness and woke culture from our public institutions, so we stop policing what people say and think, or voting reform so people can more freely choose who should represent them. So, in short, we want to repair and maximize individual freedom, liberty, and democracy for a more bottom up society. Because, as our slogan goes, the people are the masters and not the servants. That's where we are broadly coming from, a very much bottom up society. To put that in political speak, I would say
Yeah.
we are a cross between conservatism and libertarianism, where we have a very heavy emphasis on freedom, as I've just said, and very much to free markets, free trade, certainly free speech, which is a humongous issue. It's absolutely extraordinary. And again, all of these issues and all of these sort of priorities, which just are not properly represented today. It's really quite shocking. I find the mainstream parties and the mainstream politicians all as economically and politically left wing as each other. And it really is high time, I think, for a genuine conservative and libertarian voice to emerge. And again, that's what we're going to try and do over the long term.
No, that's absolutely fine. And this is, of course, why I reached out to you. You know, ourselves, we're called the Libertarian Conservative Group. It doesn't get more libertarian conservative than that, I think. And I I do, for me, put quite keenly conservative social values, but with libertarian economic policy
Mm.
and libertarian laissez-faire approach to a lot of things. So you said freedom of speech. For me, one thing that whenever you're debating freedom of speech is that the one response you always get from people on the left is racist. All you want is racist. All you want to use this to say words that you can't say. And it's like that's not the case. I want people to be able to say whatever they want. I also want then the freedom to take them people down as well with common debate. So it's always a big misnomer, and freedom of speech does need to be grasped
Oh,
back.
absolutely. And just to build on that as well, I mean, there's two principal reasons in my mind. I mean, there's many of them, but principal for me reasons why freedom of speech is so important. One of them is of course to protect the right of the individual, of course, but the other is to protect the rights of everybody else to hear what is being said and to make up their own mind. And this is the point that many on the left miss. And I think ultimately what it comes down to, very simply, is people that are very politically active, predominantly on the left, who feel that it's not got nothing to do with violating or having any illiberal, disgusting, sort of immoral points of view. No, it's simply a point of view, a contrary point of view, which they don't want the audience to hear. They don't want the voters, the electorate, to hear it because it's not convenient for them politically or electorally. And so, I mean, do you remember? I will never forget as well. Do you remember that episode of Question Time? It was some years ago now. Do you remember? I think it was around 2009, 2010, when Nick Griffin, the then leader
Yeah,
of the BNP, do you remember? He got invited on to Question Time because
yeah.
I think they got a flurry of councillors or something. This was, yeah. I
They've
mean,
got a flurry of councillors, and I think they'd also won some MEP seats as well. So
oh, that's
you
right.
couldn't ignore them anymore. Let's put it that way.
I forgot about it. Yes, you're right. They got a couple of MEPs as well. That's right. So yes, exactly. They were just kind of, making themselves known. So they couldn't be ignored. But I don't know. I mean, it's the BBC, so I imagine it was a horrific mistake and error, and they somebody got fired or told off. But it was actually absolutely the right and proper thing to do to put Nick Griffin on the BBC Question Time, not because it's democratic and we can hold people up to account, but because of the issue of freedom of speech. What happened during the course of that program? He struggled to defend his views. He really struggled.
Yeah.
He wasn't able to silence the panelists. He wasn't able to silence the audience. He really struggled. And I'm all in favor of people having views that are in minority. I mean, of any kind, and let them justify. I'll give them more time, if anything. One out of 100 might be right. Give them more time, let them justify if they can, and let's see if they can persuade anybody, us, with reason, logic, or evidence. Now, Nick Griffin wasn't able to do that.
No, it weren't.
I remember, I didn't like his views either, and absolutely, I'm glad he went away. But he went away. We never heard from him ever again because he was given that spotlight, because he was given the freedom to speak, and people were given the freedom to hear, to listen, and to make up their own mind. And so that is the point that is so often missed. And that is really, it's not just about, trying to protect people's ears. It's having trust in people to make up their own mind, to be intelligent enough to listen to evidence and to reason and to vote accordingly. And those that deserve to stand will, those that won't, they won't be around for much longer. And it's that lack of tolerance that we don't see on the left. But I think that is certainly the classical liberal thing to do, but also the healthier thing to do in general.
Exactly. And that's ultimately it. It was, thank God the BBC ignored the people saying you should no platform. It weren't called that back then, but that's what it's being commonly phrased now. Thank God they didn't listen to the protesters. Thank God they brought him on. Why? Because under free speech, he spoke his opinion freely and people shot him down and he skulked away and has not talked that opinion since. And for me, you can't deal with isms like racism, sexism, all that kind of stuff by burying it under the rug. You can only deal with them by tackling them head on. And you might not like what they've got to say, but as long as they're not inciting violence or mass panic by shouting fire, by all means, let them speak their opinion. I want to know who these people are in society so we can change their opinion, change their mindset.
And moreover as well, it's so counterproductive. It's just plain counterproductive as well, because when somebody is deplatformed or no platform, they're now effectively silenced, and someone's got particularly vile views, for example.
Yeah.
What happens? They resurface with a freedom of speech wrapping around them, and now they've got a point. They didn't have one before. For example, say take somebody with particularly minority views, which is say racist or something like, or maybe sexist, or something like that, plain discriminatory, for example.
Yeah.
He didn't have a point before. Now he's been deplatformed. He was denied his right to speak those views, and then he comes back. He reemerges a bit more loudly this time with under a free speech banner, and now he's got a point. He didn't before, but now he does. And then you've got people that half buy into the original views because they've got so much sympathy and sympathy with the subsequent view. So it's so stupid,
Yeah.
utterly stupid for the left to be so aggressive and deplatform, no platform people. Stupid as well as illiberal.
Exactly. The one word that comes to mind, just as you were saying, that was martyr. You've turned them into martyrs.
Yeah.
You've also had the Barbra Streisand effect on them, like we're seeing right now on the internet with them. In effect, no platforming conspiracy theories. Yeah, they might be nonsense. They might not be nonsense. You can't really say whether or not, but as soon as you know platforming them, you're like, okay, so they might actually have a point. And then people start viewing it, and then it's had the opposite effect by silencing and shutting them down. But if it's all right with you, I think we'll move on. I think we might actually come back on to the preservation of liberty in a bit, so we can talk more about it then. But another big one that's pertinent at the moment is, where does your party stand on Brexit? I know that Brexit is almost at its end, and this is not really a position that defined parties this time round like it did in 2017. But just for anyone who doesn't know what your party's all about so far, where would you stand on the whole issue?
Oh, well, massively in favour. I mean, if the country is not free, then its citizens are certainly not. I mean, I myself personally was very much involved in the referendum campaigning on the ground in my patch, where I then lived in Croydon in South London, and with some other UKIP colleagues who'd done an amazing job. We formed a team to campaign on the ground. We were handing out leaflets door to door, street stalls in the high street. We set up our own local town meetings, and we just worked so hard for about 9 months, twice a week. I stopped work. I was self-employed. I had that luxury. I sort of gave up, paused, getting a contract. I just dedicated myself to campaign and to spread the literature and to try to give that impression to people that this is a common view. This is an acceptable view. This is a valid view. This is a very powerful view. And I'm really quite proud of that. And so we are, myself and the Foundation Party are in favour of independence and self-government. It's as simple as that. It's just not democratic. The European Union is just not compatible with democracy. It is an illusion. And this is a subject that we could talk for hours all by itself. But I never ever, unless you are in favour of a United States of Europe, unless you are in favour of becoming more and more of a single European state, I really cannot possibly see the political or intellectual justification for trading away sovereignty, for trading away self-government, for trading away and for diluting massively your own democracy and the accountability of those that make the laws and make the rules, in return for some sort of economic safety comfort blanket. It's an utterly bankrupt proposition, and that economic comfort blanket is not even what it was in the 1970s. The world has changed so much. It's just crazy to be stuck inside a customs union rather than engage with the world on a much more equal basis. So it's an incredibly backwards looking organization and project, and I look forward to the day and our party does that. The whole thing comes tumbling down. I think people want more control in their lives. They're not voting for less of it.
No,
I think it's on the wrong side of history. I think it's inevitable. It's just a question of how and political kind of strategy and elections. It's very difficult. It doesn't come down easily. It's been designed deliberately to resist that. And unfortunately, of course, there won't be any referendums in other member states anytime soon, because the national governments, the elitists who are in love with the European Union and want it, they know that a referendum can be lost on the subject. They've seen that now, so they're going to be very wary of such a thing. So it's difficult to see how everyone else escapes from it, but we wish them luck and hope they do. But that's A long answer to a short question, but in short, we're in favour of Brexit. Absolutely, no question about it.
Perfect. Well, I don't even need to explain our position. So, if you want, I was looking through your website and I've picked out some key areas that will probably grab people's attention. It should grab people's attention, as these should be at the forefront of any sort of political party at the moment in terms of direction. So, you say you want to empower local communities by transferring power downwards. Now, that's been promised before. If by other political parties, but it's never happened. Do you want to explain how you would achieve this if you were elected as Prime Minister tomorrow?
Well, it's true that the Conservative Party had an internal conversation about it around sort of 10 years ago when David Cameron was leader of the opposition. And do you remember David Cameron's Big Society?
Yeah, I do.
Yes, I mean there were some there's a few good apples inside the Conservative Party at the time. I think of Douglas Carswell, for example, and Daniel Hannan, who very much advocated this kind of program. But in the end, ultimately, David Cameron and George Osborne clearly didn't really understand it, or they used it merely for window dressing. Although they did implement some things, but they didn't go anywhere near as far as the likes of Hannan and Carswell would have done. And so we are very much advocates of some of their proposals and some of their policy. But in a nutshell, we are talking about, I mean, in terms of why it didn't happen, it's just a complete lack of will and a lack of really belief in that's the right thing. But for we who have a huge kind of libertarian tendency that want a more bottom-up society where people are making many more decisions than failed politicians are. Yes, we want to see what happened with Scotland, for example, the Scotland Act of 1998, with those powers devolved. We certainly want to see those devolved to local county councils with education, law and order. When at the end of the day, let's when we talk about crime, for example, we often hear in the House of Commons, and we hear the leader of the opposition, the Prime Minister, going back and forth, talking about statistics and saying how one crime or another is down 50% or up 12% or whatever, a national average. I mean, who cares? I mean, unless we're competing in some sort of international crime statistic Olympics, what we really care about is how safe our streets are. Is how safe is my kid walking to and from school? How safe are my family when we how safe is my house when I leave? I might be thinking about a new area that I might move to, or my area right now. These are local issues, and they deserve local policies and local emphasis rather than a national approach. I mean, you've still got obviously some national policy making, but there's a huge amount more that can be done locally. So we are very much about localizing policy making. We would also tax and money is a big part of this as well. So the idea of councils becoming self-financing rather than receiving endless grants from national government, which is a form of backseat driving. It's very unaccountable. It's very undemocratic. There's lots of reasons for problems with that, and so we would introduce something called a local sales tax, and give councils the autonomy and the powers to raise additional taxes if they so wish. So, as a direction of travel, absolutely, it's weakening central, distant, remote, one size fits all national government, and empowering local government, and also enriching local democracy too. So parties can actually have a manifesto, a local manifesto, which is actually different to the other party, rather than arguing about bin collections and other matters which they have no control of. So that's generally where we are as a direction of travel. The decisions basically being made closer to the people that they affect.
I'm glad. It's something the Libertarian Conservative Group has been advocating. I think since the very early days, we believed. I don't know if we'd go to the extreme of calling it a federalized state, but we've always looked at the American model. So where the economy, the major economy, and defence, and you've got federal police and laws, etc. But they could be dealt with by Westminster. But instead, you revert to your local county council as almost the states like Florida and Texas, and they can set their own policies for taxation to keep themselves afloat. They can set their own policies for welfare, health, policing. It's their responsibility, and you vote locally depending on those issues.
Yes.
I noticed that you said you'd call for referendum on would you call for referendum? Sorry, on local issues like that, or
I'm very open-minded about specifically what. I mean, nationally, I think referendums are best suited for constitutional matters. I think for me, the criteria there of referendums are things that cannot be easily undone at the next general or local election. Things that are going to affect the next 50 years or even forever or something. So if someone was going to build a new, I don't know, incinerator or something, or a nuclear power plant or something, I don't know. I mean, it's yeah, it's not something you can easily undo in the next election. If you want to change your mind about something, whether we should increase local spending or decrease it, for example. But I'm open-minded specifically on what the criteria may be. But again, the direction of travel is more about enhancing democracy. And at the moment we have a situation, and we get this from councils all the time. Myself, I'm a parish councillor. I'm seeing it now for the first time. It's people do get easily ignored. They really do. We've had a large housing development project that's just been voted through. In fairness to Ashford Borough Council, there was a majority of ones. There's a good bulk of councillors who spoke against it and voted against it, despite the fact that there is a huge kind of army of residents that are sort of desperately against it, and a wide range of views, but they just sort of ploughed on. And there's just a kind of lack of, it's all over the place. There's a real lack of connection, a real sort of bulldozing of residential concerns, and there's a complete no relationship building there being done at all. It really is not a partnership, and again, it goes to our motto. The people are the masters, not the servants, and too often decisions are made as if it were the other way around. That's the problem we have. We have elites in national and local government. And so our direction of travel here, whether it's devolving powers and making decisions that are set closer to the people, so it becomes more transparent and more accountable. It's all about enhancing democracy, enhancing the stake and the control and the steering capacity of individual taxpayers. So at the moment, nobody knows where the money comes from what, whether it's local parish council, whether it's your district council, your county council, Whitehall, national government. They all blame each other when things go wrong, and no one knows really where the money comes from. It's an absolute mess, and you cannot have accountability, understandability if it is so complicated. And in a nutshell, that's the direction of travel, to really improve accountability, transparency, and enrich democracy.
Yeah, no, definitely. So it's fair to say then, following on from this, you would agree that we'd need to maybe write a constitution that would restore the trust in British politics?
That's food for thought. There's a huge conversation to be had about a new constitution, what that could encompass. But in terms of localization and localism and devolving powers, I mean, that could be done with an act of parliament, just as the devolvement of powers to Scotland was with the Scotland Act of 98. I think it got updated in 2002-ish. So an act similar to that could devolve those powers. Scrap the Department of Local Government and Community affairs and so on, and devolve those powers down too. That can be done with simple acts of parliament. But in terms of something a bit grander, like a constitution, which that's we're talking about a kind of written, or should we say, a codified constitution? Perhaps, I wonder, moving away. Is that what you are pointing to? Moving away from our unwritten constitution to something that's codified? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, if we could codify, because look at Brexit. That almost derailed the entire country entirely. And I don't mean metaphorically, I mean literally. You had the Speaker of the House acting as the de facto Prime Minister. You had the Supreme Court overruling the Prime Minister that wasn't elected at the time, but appointed legally, rightfully, and the Queen agreed to it as well. You had MPs holding a government to ransom, and you had the people just wanting them to get on with Brexit. And I think because there's no written constitution in place, there was the likes of the Speaker using rules that haven't been used for absolute years. And we're not talking 10 or 20, we're talking hundreds. You've got the Supreme Court using rulings and legislation from King Henry VIII's period to overrule the Prime Minister. So we need something just like the American one that sets it in stone and holds the tyrannical government, because I don't mean the elected government, i.e. Johnson and his cabinet, they're not entirely tyrannical, but what the MPs were doing were acting as a tyrannical government
Absolutely.
and going against what we'd elected for. You don't have to agree with it as a representative, but if
Yes.
that's what the people want, that's what the people get. And because there's no written constitution legally binding them to anything, they were doing what they wanted, and it almost derailed the country. So yes, I would like to see a codified one, because without a codified one, of course, you get the exact same that you saw there with Brexit, with MPs determining what they wanted, and I can't think of the word. They determined what they wanted, and they were
Well, they're holding the government to ransom. I mean,
interpreting. Sorry, that's what I was thinking of. They were interpreting laws, legislation, and rules how they saw fit.
Of course, of course. I mean, here's the interesting thing. I mean, first and foremost, I'm massively in favour. That is my and our position currently. It is to have a codified constitution. It's interesting listening to some conservatives who will speak against it and raise, I think, legitimate concerns. The main one being, well, before we get to that, let's just be clear. What we're talking about here ultimately, and this is, I think, my understanding about the American Constitution in particular, the spirit of it is meant so that the people cannot directly affect the laws that govern them, but then the politicians, they ought not to directly affect the rules that govern them either. So you need each other, basically. You need both parties. The ruling class, the government, the parliamentarians, they cannot make up the rules as they go along, essentially, and decide the way in which. I mean, even there's other issues as well. Things like extending the parliamentary term from 4 to 5 years, for example, the Fixed Term Parliament Act. This is, these are things that are conjured up by the ruling class, which affects how they are themselves governed. And it's not, so there's absolutely more strident checks for this in the American, they have obviously a written constitution which is to protect the rights of the people, and you need a 2/3 majority in both houses to change it. And I think at the moment you can do it with a simple majority in Parliament. You can change whatever you like. So I don't. And Brexit, as you say, really exposed the weaknesses arguably in our constitution. There's no question about that. And so I'm hugely in favour. We have floated a policy which we still stand by today, absolutely quite proudly. It was last year when Brexit was really kicking off, which really, as we just said, really exposed some huge problems. It was called a Charter of Independence. This was our idea of having, if you like, an American-style list of clauses, which are things that are ring-fenced, and that ordinary legislation cannot just change with a simple majority. So, for example, like our sovereignty, the British Parliament shall be sovereign and never again subordinate to another parliament overseas, with the ability to make an override UK law. Democracy, UK law will be made only by democratically elected British citizens. Trade, the government should always retain at all times the unilateral ability to set its own import tariffs. Immigration, it should always retain the ability to control its own borders, territorial waters, legal jurisdiction, defence, economic independence. Again, we can never debate and seriously become dangerously close to adopting the euro or anything like it without a referendum. That was the sort of idea that we had, to erect a Charter of Independence, and that could be a simple act of parliament, and good luck to any party that would want to challenge that and try to repeal that and just strip away everybody's sort of rights in that regard and protections over their own country. Or it could be something that's more hard-coded into a constitution. So a Charter of Independence was very much a policy that we floated in the campaign that we were looking to push again in the future. But yeah, open-minded about whether it's soft or hard in terms of its defined constitutional or just an act of parliament. But it's about having those kind of hard-coded sort of ring-fenced attributes about our country and how it is governed and how we as people are governed, rather than the ruling class be able to make up as they go along. And that's the problem we need to solve. And that's our immediate kind of thoughts on how we might, one way of perhaps resolving it.
No, I can't disagree with many of the points you've raised in your constitution, or de facto constitution at least. One thing that strikes me, though, is we're talking about trust of politicians and trust of parliament. We've just come out of dealing with Brexit with a bit of calm. and Boris Johnson got his deal through, whether you agreed with it or not. He got it through. It looks like there was a beginning to the end of Brexit. Then, of course, coronaviruses hit, and what strikes me is how untrusting people still are of the government, and they're asking us to trust them, but we don't. And this is all stemmed back from 2016 onwards, and the getting Brexit done will not solve the distrust. And there's a pandemic, whether you agree it's deadly or not, that's a different argument for a different time. But it's definitely clear to me here that people do not trust what the government are saying, no matter what they're saying. And they've opened a can of worms that I don't think they will be able to put to bed without, of course, doing something like a constitution where the people finally know where they stand with the government.
Yes, absolutely. You're right, and it's a historic problem. And again, to relate it back to Brexit would be one of them. Whether it's how the European Union has evolved and how it has ruled more and more of the country on more and more major issues, and we look up and suddenly find that nobody actually voted for this, and our own politicians pretending that everything's fine. We've got all of these issues. The day before the referendum election night on June the 23rd, 2016, on June the 22nd, 2016, our membership of the European Union did not have any democratic mandate whatsoever. None. I mean, we voted in favour of joining what was then something very different, the European Economic Community in 1975, or indeed we voted for it after they put us in it. And it was incredibly. We both know, without going into the detail, we all know how different it was then, and it was a much smaller club, different powers, different everything. And then for all this time, nobody's asked the people whether they were okay with this. By the way, guys, just to check with everybody, is everybody happy with the way the situation has evolved? Should we just check to make sure? Did you have any concerns with any of the directions of travel here implicitly with our membership and how we are now got a club of 28 member states? With migration now going up hugely, and the effects that has. Is everybody okay with this? I mean, they don't care about the thoughts and feelings of the people, whether it's on that issue or any other. And so when we've got that kind of abuse of power and abuse of trust over so many years, that's not going to be reversed quickly or anytime soon. It's certainly not, frankly, going to be reversed by any of these parties. And it's just not. None of them have got any clue, any genuine standing in the real world on these issues at all. And if they do, they don't have the bollocks, frankly, to say anything, that isn't ultra politically correct. And they really haven't got the courage to actually say anything that might reflect a true, honest thought that somebody thinks or feels on these issues. So it's an historic issue. And it's going to take an awful lot of work going forward, but I don't think it's going to be solved by these people.
No.
And it's going to come from outside. But it's looking pretty grim on that subject. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. I'm going to move away from the that topic, if that's all right with you. And I noticed on your website again, you looked through all the policies you've got on there right now, and I couldn't disagree with many of them. But you have one, and you call it robust law and order. But this is something that all parties claim to support, to promote, to even want to implement. So why is your claim of robust law and order different?
Again, I think it's yet another reason why the Conservative Party is not much of a conservative party. I think it used to be the party of law and order, and it wants to pretend that it is now, but it isn't. I think it's a lack of courage. It's a lack of will. I mean, today we've got a situation where there was a great report done by the think tank Civitas in 2008, 2019, which surveyed the prison population in England and Wales of 2016, and 70% of the prison population in England and Wales have at least 7 prior convictions or cautions, and 50% have at least 15 prior convictions. So in other words, the only people that go to prison are the serial or serious offenders. So if you're convicted of killing somebody, if you're convicted of rape, if you're convicted of something very serious, you go to prison. But if you're a serial offender, but not of such a serious crime, it will take several goes before you finally end up in prison. And by the time they get to prison, they are, of course, already hardened criminals. So it's a bit late to try and rehabilitate them then. And so I think it really is a matter of getting on top of the situation and having much stronger deterrence and being tough on the street, having zero tolerance policies, frankly, on the streets, whether it's things like graffiti, whether it's antisocial behavior, getting much tougher, especially with younger people, especially with teenagers who think they can show off in front of their mates and give police officers stick and give them abuse, and let them get away with warnings and fines for for small issues. It starts at the beginning. It starts with this kind of street level crime, which we should have a much more tougher approach to try and deter the future criminality which does arise. So it's which would mean an immediate increase in the prison population. Yes, that's the argument about it. We need to send more people to prison. We don't want to do that. It's about deterrence. It's the longer term. The idea is that the longer term would see a decreased prison population. At the moment, it's forever going to be higher and higher because of this very soft attitude that we have on crime. We've got police knocking on doors of people that have sent and dispatched offensive tweets.
Yeah.
We have got an incredibly soft police force and criminal justice system in this country. It's absolutely extraordinary. There's just so many instances where we've got major crime units that have been set up to investigate offensive speech and people having their feelings hurt, and that really does tie back into the freedom of speech and the kind of liberty that we were talking about earlier and the loss of it. All of it is connected. We've got our priorities wrong as a country, as a society, broadly speaking, and that is thanks to our left-wing, so-called progressive, modern, politically correct politicians who are changing our country for the worse and who have no courage whatsoever to stand by any true value or principle like liberty. We've got our priorities wrong, and as a result, we've got a very soft criminal justice system where, yes, we can't fit people in the prisons because we're so soft, and when people are often sentenced for something quite serious, they're let out after a year or two. I mean, I saw there was an incident the other day. I've forgotten. I should have come more prepared. Where there was a kid that was arrested for carrying about 6 knives on him. One of them was a bloody combat knife, the sort of knife that a soldier would be issued with.
Yeah.
And I don't know where he was going or what he was planning to do with it, but he was caught. He was arrested, and he got nothing happened really. He got suspended sentence for 6 months. He got an ankle bracelet, and that was it really. So a year from now, nothing happened. It's just we've got a very very soft system indeed. And I say our point really here is that we need to toughen up and how to take a much more longer term view. Really, it's as simple as that.
Yeah, definitely. Our judicial system has been weak for a while now, and I don't like using the term left and right because I don't think it gives an ultimate picture, because the political spectrum is 3D. It's not a simple linear left and right, but just for the sake of sense, the left wing of our country have, you could say, infected these institutions, and instead of them being institutions of law and order, upholding British morals, upholding British standards, upholding what Britain is about, they've actively undermined it. And one of the key evidence of that is our weak judicial system. You're better off now sometimes being in prison than you are going to work, because you're looked after much better than you can do yourself. And it's why a lot of people do go to crime, especially the homeless. So it shows a big problem in our country, not just socially, but judicially. It's all broken, and it does need ripping up, or not even ripping up, but it needs disinfecting completely.
I mean, and again, talking about wrong priorities as well. I mean, it's just extraordinary how, say, criminals that are convicted of serious offences are let out earlier and receive very lenient sentences. I believe, generally speaking, by the way, that we are actually quite. I take the point, by the way, about not simplifying these things with left and right. And I think you are absolutely right. I've heard an argument for in 4 dimensions actually these days, which is quite interesting. But just for the sake of conversation, we are aware that it's more complicated than that. But for the sake of conversation, I think the country as a whole is, broadly speaking, quite right wing on law and order. I really do. I do genuinely think that we believe in fairness. We believe it's that classical liberal definition, really, isn't it? That freedom is yours to do with what you may, as long as it doesn't inhibit or disrupt the freedom of somebody else, to something along those lines. And it's very much a sense of if anyone does break the rules and really cheat and at other people's expense, then they really do need to pay the consequence of that. And we do need to, there is a real strong feeling of that in our country. And I think it's one of those issues, again, and there are so many of them, where the establishment is so out of touch and so distant and remote from ordinary people. And I think law and order and this very issue of just being nowhere near tough enough and having all the wrong priorities is absolutely a big one of them. I really do. Yeah. And incidentally, just overlap, a separate issue, but overlapping. I talk about wrong priorities, the coronavirus as well. I mean, honestly, what some police forces have behaved absolutely appallingly. Some of them have been absolutely fine and used common sense, but some of them have been absolutely appalling, where they're challenging residents now for standing on their own front garden, their own property. And when they're giving press conferences and threatening to investigate people's shopping baskets, whether it's an essential item. I mean, there's a complete and utter, the whole British policing tradition of policing by consent and citizens in uniform, basically. Again, it goes back to that motto of ours, the Foundation Party: the people are the masters, not the servants. The police need to remember that. The police are the servants, the people are the masters, not the other way around. And what we have seen during this coronavirus sort of episode, we have seen the police become very authoritarian and very trampling over basic liberties as well. And the government and politicians are responsible for that too. It's again, I don't know if you want to go down this route in this conversation, perhaps not, but that's because that's an issue all by itself. For at least another hour. We have got some real values and principles to champion, and that is ultimately the whole purpose of the Foundation Party. We are a party of first principles, whether it's freedom, liberty, or democracy. And this is really the theme, and this is what we're all about. And I think it's the discovery, the rediscovery, and the promotion, the aggressive promotion of our British values, which are actually the key and the answer to many of our problems. That's where we're coming from, and I think it applies to many issues, small and big.
No, that's absolutely fine. Like you said, it's too much of a bigger issue, but I wouldn't mind doing a podcast about it in the future if you ever want to come back after this one, of course.
I'll be happy. Absolutely.
Perfect. I did have a question on here about preservation of freedom of speech and liberty, but I think we've covered that actually through all the previous 4 topics that we've just discussed. So I want to ask, you've had you could say quite good electoral success already, like you said, 2 elected councillors, and you're only 2 years old? Year old? Sorry.
Yeah. Yes.
Where do you see the Foundation Party in 10 years' time?
Well, we're keen to improve on that and to expand. So right now, as it happens, we are set to contest the local elections next year. The ones that were going to be held around about now, but got pushed back because of the virus until next year. So there's a couple of district councils, but it's mostly it's a mix actually. District councils. Some of them are having a third of their councils re-elected, and there's county councils as well. So we are looking to mount a challenge right now. We are recruiting candidates. That's our disadvantage, obviously, being a new startup. Other parties have a long list of approved candidates. So we are really acting really quite aggressively right now. We've got people coming forward. We're getting a few every week. We're about to really splash out a bit of paid advertising and really kind of reach people that do want to stand as a councillor and feel as we do about some of the issues that we've discussed today.
Yeah.
And feel that some of the parties just don't simply represent them. So we want to give an opportunity to people to serve their community and to really work for them with the priorities and principles and values that we aspire to advocate. And we're looking forward to continue that process, to recruit candidates and to contest those elections. And yeah, we are we've got a lot to talk about, and we think we can do something quite special. Watch this space. We've got, just very briefly, we've got councils, again, just like the national government, that are just as economically left wing as each other. Conservative Party councils that are racking up millions of pounds in debt. Kent County Council, for example, has a £1 billion debt. It is spending £118 million every year. It's the third biggest line of expenditure every single year.
Yeah.
It's more than it spends on public health. It's more it spends on transport, on highways. Borrowing costs is absolutely huge, and not enough people know about it because they bury the statistics. And now we have the coronavirus. Guess what? They are going to blame the coronavirus to cover up the debt and the misspending that happened years before. So this is the challenge that we have us on our hand. We want to absolutely make it plain that these parties are taking voters and local taxpayers for granted. They are not responsible enough, and they are ignoring their views and trampling all over them. So we want to provide an offering, a completely different approach, a more bottom-up society nationally, and greater democracy and accountability, and more prudent and responsible, and policy and decision-making that better reflects the needs and the wishes and thoughts and feelings and sensitivities of the people that are paying for that government. So that's our offering, and we're hoping to make a splash next year. And so I suppose, I know you did ask about 10 years. I suppose the point is that we are.
It's just when I say 10 years, it's normally a question that you're asked by other interviewers, and it's just a broad timescale. Just where do you see the party in the future? One good thing I'd like to bring into it, if you want, I could probably interlink the two questions, is just on from what you've said before, along with where do you see yourself in 10 years? Attracting voters from opposing political parties. How do you intend to implement that in the mixture of your future?
I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, I was going to just quickly say is that ultimately our general attitude is to take each day as it comes. We're very humble in what we can achieve. We know the scale of this task, to start a new party from scratch. We know we haven't got a millionaire donor. We don't want one either. We haven't got a big celebrity to come on board. I mean, one might come on board in the future, but we are hardworking people from the grassroots that are looking to just build organically, and so we're very humble in that sense. We don't want to kind of pretend that we're going to be this big party in the future. That's for the people to decide whether they like what we hear and what they hear and what we say, and what we do for them in office and the local councils, where we're good enough for them, and we're going to encourage them, hopefully, and persuade them to continue that relationship, and then we'll see where we are. But we've absolutely, the bottom line is, in terms of getting a broad coalition of people together, it really is about, as I say, it's that more bottom-up society. We want to empower people, and we want people to make more decisions, and for inefficient, failed politicians to make fewer of them. I mean, I was looking at a borough councillor report the other day where he'd opted to spend 500 quid on a local football club. I mean, I play football every week. I love football. I'm an Arsenal fan. I love football. But if there's a football club that's struggling to raise money, then the people have already decided not to give their money to that business. It's a business like no other, like any other. We shouldn't be subsidizing struggling businesses in general. And we have these high street funds that are giving money to business left, right, and centre. They are right to apply for it and get it, but they are wrong to be offered it. It's not what people are expecting their money to be spent on. To prop up and subsidise businesses. It's there for public services. It's there for us to achieve things collectively that we can't do individually. There's so much left-wing, misguided, wasteful spending, and just pure wasteful spending as well. There's an awful lot of money that is spent, which belongs to the people. It's their council tax money spent in ways which I know it would surprise them and wouldn't necessarily approve of it either. So there's so many. Again, that's a topic all by itself. So the point is that we've got an awful lot of work to do on the ground to present these issues and to present an alternative offering, better value for money, more efficiency and competence in local government, and more accountability and transparency and democracy locally, nationally. And that's, to go to your question finally, please forgive me.
That's all right, don't worry.
That is a universal issue. It goes to where we started to begin with at the beginning of this, which is really how the mainstream parties do not reflect and do not reflect the people on a whole host of issues, and that is universal, left and right. So I'm optimistic. I think we're on the right track, but it's not for us to judge. It's for the people, and hopefully they'll approve of us when they see us on their ballot paper. But we're looking forward. We're optimistic about the future, but we take one day as it comes.
It's all you ever can do. If you run before you can walk, you'll end up failing, and it's
Mm.
what happens to a lot of political parties. So I think you're going the right way about it. I'm going to end on one final question. It's one I always ask to parties, not so much the exact question, but the same line at least. So, what makes the Foundation Party different from other parties like the Conservative Party or UKIP?
I think of the Conservative Party, as I say, we've touched on a little bit implicitly
Yeah,
throughout the podcast, but to put it explicitly, we are the party of the first principles that the Conservative Party should be defending. They should be in favour of national self government. In my opinion, I don't think they should. I don't think the Conservative Party should be in favour of supranational government, which tramples on the liberty and democracy and democratic rights of its own citizens. And I don't think it should be in favour of big corporates that gives and the kind of elitist kind of bureaucracy and the unbalancing in the economy that really makes it difficult for the small business on the ground. I don't like the unlevel playing field in our economy in that regard. It should be in favour of free trade. It shouldn't be in favour of tariff barriers, as it has been predominantly. It pretends it's in favour of free trade now. It pretends it's in favour of independence now. It pretends it's in favour of basic civil liberties, but it's not. None of them are. They are pretending because we've had a referendum and we've had to drag them kicking and screaming, even after the referendum, which touched on many of these principles, which is why it's been so explosive. It's really gone to the heart of so many of these neglected values. They wanted to carry on and pretend and have us half in, half out with Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. They tried even to ignore us and to kind of get by as they usually do. And they think they can just feed us these sound bites and think that they're suddenly conservative all of a sudden and suddenly principled. They're not. They are not. They are an incredibly unprincipled, useless party who will, never. We can always trust a Conservative Party to abandon anything conservative that it adopts for 5 minutes. It is utterly principleless and hopeless as a party. It knows what to say to bail itself out when it can't win elections, which is what it's just done with Boris Johnson and get Brexit done and so on. But we'll be fools to think that we've suddenly got some sort of principled government, once again, actually cares about the people, or any of our historic values like freedom, liberty, or democracy. It doesn't. We do. The Foundation Party has been created as a direct result of the failings as a result of the failings of the mainstream parties, the Tories and the left as well, and UKIP. Well,
yeah, we covered that already.
I mean, doesn't need any comment from either of us, to be honest. But essentially, yes, that's what we're about. The Foundation Party, the party of first principles, on the side of the people, and I hope in due course that will become evident. And I look forward to hopefully to introducing the party to as many people as we can up and down the country, and hopefully we can build those relationships, and with their permission hopefully we can push on and do something special for the country. Time will tell, but we'll see.
It sounds great. I'm not going to lie. Your passion is unfounded by a lot of political parties nowadays. You don't see many people speaking the way you do and as fervently as you are. But we have come to the end of the podcast.
I'm grateful to you, James.
No, it's all right. Do you have any points that you'd want to make that you haven't had a chance to at all, or?
Oh, we covered a lot there. We really did. Democracy, Brexit, freedom of speech, a little bit on the economy. There's God, ask me that question. We'd be here for another 4 hours. There's so much to talk about. Hey, listen, I'd love to take you up on your offer for doing this again, and we can pick an issue or two because there's so much to talk about. It's as I say, it's the neglect of these lost values that really, and this is the basic thesis here, which is it is the neglect of our lost British values: freedom, liberty, and democracy, and others, and really does relate to so much of some of these issues and the problems that we have now as a country. And so, yes, we can take any of them, and you can count on the Foundation Party to have an awful lot to say and having a genuine, authentic, alternative point of view, and providing the real opposition that we should have and that we don't. So anytime you're free, my friend, call me anytime, and we'll do this again.
Certainly. I will say, the Foundation Party and the Libertarian Conservative Group are now officially affiliates. It's been, what, 2-3 weeks now?
Indeed,
I can't remember. But we did release a press release about it. So it's been great to finally get you on. I invite all political parties on, big and small. As you know, the Libertarian Conservative Group want to help small parties break through that barrier that the larger parties have put in place. But as I said, we have come to the end of the podcast. It has been a great discussion. I would like to thank you, Chris, for coming on today and representing the Foundation Party. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I wish you and your party all the best.
Likewise. Thank you very much, James. Thank you.
No problem. I would also like to say thank you to everyone who's been listening to the Libertarian Conservative Group podcast. Before we go, I'd appreciate it if our listeners have enjoyed our podcast to hit like, press subscribe. Until next time, goodbye. Just click end. There we are.